It's 3:30. We can get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining DataCon LA 2020. Welcome to the Data for Good track, and soon we'll be listening to the Combining Datasets to Find Solutions to Homelessness session with Andrea Khan. I'm Annie Flippo, your host, and our co-host today is Ritesh Dahiya, and we'll be moderating the chat and Q&A for the duration of this session. Andre has volunteered and worked in the homeless services for 8 years now. He has a background in sales and management, have worked at AT&T's corporate business sector for 9 years before pursuing a career change. He currently works for LA Family Housing as a data coordinator, where he collects and analyzes data for permanent supportive housing residents. Andre has a bachelor's degree in anthropology and is graduating with an MBA in November with a focus on business analytics and corporate strategy. Without further ado, I'll hand this over to the speaker. Thanks for being here. This is Andre.
Thank you, Annie. Hi, everyone. My name is Andres. A little bit about me. So I am a data coordinator at LA Family Housing. Previously, I have 8 years of volunteer and work experience within the homeless services field. I annually volunteer as a data site coordinator with LASA for the annual homeless count. I'm also a US Census Goodwill Ambassador. Previously, I've also worked with the Shower of Hope, the Monday Night Mission, and School on Wheels. Part of my research today is going to be a little bit of what I learned through my MBA program. It's all independent research, and all of the data sets I'm using, it's all public data, publicly available information. I'll be giving you an overview of homelessness and then get into some of the research I've been doing. It'll cover some of the housing and health effects, a little bit about the US Census, and mapping homeless encampments through user data. So like I said, it's all 100% public data. You can find this yourself, and I'll be sharing the links of where to find them. And the programs I'm using is very simple. It's just Excel and Tableau. You can also use Esri or any other mapping program that you're interested in. So to begin, currently we have 66,000 people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles. That's as of the last annual homeless count in January. 41,000 of those are in the city of LA, and that's a 16% increase over 2019. We have multiple types of homelessness, so it requires multiple solutions. In Los Angeles, we practice CES, which is the Coordinated Entry System. And so what that does is it matches someone to a homeless service based on their needs. So some people need interim housing, some people need basic services, and some people need permanent housing. So I'll be getting into more of those details later. In 2016, we passed Measure H and Proposition HHH. Those are two measures that were passed that Los Angeles residents voted for. Measure H uses a 0.25% sales tax increase to combat homelessness. We provide services. HHH is specifically for housing. So HHH will fund 10,000 units of permanent supportive housing. And it's been 4 years since we last voted on this, but it takes a little bit of time. 2017 was mainly spent allocating the funds, finding out how it will be used. And then 2018 was the first year of it. So we're just about finishing up the third year of HHH. So first, what is permanent supportive housing? As you can see by the photo there, it looks like a normal apartment building. Permanent supportive housing is not a homeless shelter. Shelters offer temporary housing and services. Permanent supportive housing is designed for permanent living, as the name implies. It's built specifically for the chronically homeless. It prevents individuals with disabling conditions from falling back into homelessness. That's one of the biggest problems we've been seeing, is that people that tend to enter interim housing, they, after a few months, will fall right back into homelessness because they're not getting the services and the help that they need. So permanent supportive housing is designed specifically for that, for those individuals who fall right back into homelessness. Supportive services and counseling is offered on site. Usually they get 24/7 care. And it follows the Housing First model that's recommended by HUD. So this isn't something that's unique to California or Los Angeles. It's been around for a long time. It's evidence-based and research-based. So it's been proven to work, and it's a nationally recognized method. So here's a look at what it looks like from the inside. This is a studio apartment from one of our permanent supportive housing sites. So in order to live there, our residents must be qualified based off of a certain disability that they have. They also need to have proof of income. They sign a 1-year lease. So this really is just like a normal apartment building. They have to pay rent monthly. They do get subsidized rent, but again, they have to follow normal tenant rules. They do have case managers working on site so that if they need supportive services, it's available to them. The buildings are designed to fit within the community. So usually you won't see a lot of buildings more than 5 stories or 6 stories. It tends to fit within the neighborhood. They're all LEED certified, which means they're green, they're sustainable. This building has solar panels on the roof. Buildings typically include 40 to 60 studio apartments, again, because of the size that's allowed, but we do have some that are much bigger. We have one as large as 120 units going up. And so there's a lot of confusion when we announce these buildings going up in neighborhoods. Most people tend to assume that it's a homeless shelter. So that misinformation leads to a lot of protests and a lot of people showing up and demanding that it not continue. So it's really important to differentiate what permanent supportive housing is, what it does, and how it's different from a shelter. So to track the progress of permanent supportive housing sites, I've been doing this in a few different ways. So one is through the ControlPanel LA website. You'll see at the top right of the screen there, you'll see Ron Galperin's name. He was one of the keynote speakers today at DataCon. As controller of LA, he offers this website where you can download data, and it includes financial data, payroll, revenue, all sorts of different information. And you can search through keywords and find out a lot about just what the city's funding. And so one of those projects is the HHH projects. He's released these for every year. The most recent one has been released for 2020 last month. And this is pretty much what I've used. You can download the whole data set. It includes location address, funding details, number of units going up, the property developer. There's a lot of really interesting information in here. And so when I go to map it, that's what it looks like. Each blue dot there is a permanent supportive housing site that is either in construction or in pre-development or already completed. And I'll go into those details later. But just taking a look at what you see here, you see that there's a large cluster in the bottom right of that map. That's core downtown. That's Los Angeles, Koreatown. That's where the majority of these sites are going up. A lot less on the west side and in the San Fernando Valley. We have 111 of these sites planned, but as you can see, the majority are in core downtown LA. You can download the list of names here and the substage, so it lets you know what stage of development it's in. It also includes a number of PSH units that are being built. And so here's just a visualization of all 111 sites. So the 3 in green at the top left, those have already been completed. We have another 30 in construction. Those are the ones in blue. And in yellow, we have 3 that are loan closed. So those are very close to begin development. You'll see though, the majority is in red. Those are all in pre-development. Those look like they're going to continue. We hope so. But of course, anything can happen. There's always delays with construction. There's a lot of red tape you have to kind of deal with. So those are the ones we want to keep an eye on the most. Again, this is the same visualization, but broken down by year. So in 2019 was the first HHH housing unit that was built. We have 2 more completed in 2020 and another 11 expected this year. Of course, with COVID, it's hard to say. Some of these you'll see they're 95% complete, 93% complete. There's a good chance those will be completed this year, but for the rest, it's possible they'll get delayed. But regardless, they're still in construction. So we're still on the way. In 2021, there's a few more, there's about 10 of those. And then in 2022, we have more in construction, but you'll start to see there that these now are going to be majority pre-development. So those are still in planning, and the majority of which are expected to be completed in 2023. On average, from what I've seen, is it takes about 2 years for these to be completed. So all of those you see in 2023, you would hope would begin being constructed in the next year. And this is another visualization just telling you how many units are going to be built at each site. So it's 862 units total for 2020 that we're expecting. And through 2024, it's a total of 7,428. So that's a really high number. It's pretty much on goal with what Mayor Garcetti wanted. He proposed 10,000 units over 10 years. So again, starting from 2018 to 2028, this shows that we're on track. But again, it's very important that, you know, all of these in red in pre-development, that those actually continue, that none of those get canceled or delayed for too long. But from what we built so far, I think we've done a lot of great work. A lot of people have been kind of confused about Triple H and worried that since we voted on this in 2016, not a lot has happened, but that's not exactly the case. It was always a 10-year plan. So everything looks like it's on its way, but again, we just have to make sure that everything does get completed. So next, I layered another data set on here. This is from the California Office of Environment Health Hazard Assessment. This is a public data set from the state of California, and they call it CalEnviroScreen. CalEnviroScreen pretty much will measure the pollution rate in a neighborhood. It takes a lot of different things into account. It uses environmental information, health information, and socioeconomic information to kind of give a score or rating to a certain neighborhood. And so there's an example of what the data set looks like. So they measure it with what they call a CES score. A CES score takes into account all the different pollutants. So ozone layer, drinking water. It even does social economic factors like education, poverty level. And so based off of that, a neighborhood will get a score. And so as you can see there, this is the highest score you see at the top left, that's 94.09. So that's in the 100th percentile, and it goes on down. So I'm using information based off of the percentile because I know, it's hard to memorize just how good a CES score is just based off the number. So most important, what I focused on is the percentile. And so it lets you know what the pollution burden is for a certain neighborhood. It maps out all of California based off of census tracts. And so what I did is I layered that on top of the Triple H information. So here's the map again of Triple H sites, but now layered with the CES score. So the darker red you'll see is a higher CES percentile. That means a higher CES score, which means more pollution in that area. So again, looking at the data you see here, the majority of the highest polluted areas is going to be in core downtown. If you look at the west side in Santa Monica, those are in pink and a lighter red. That means there's less pollution there. There's a lower CES score there. So it's come to be expected. I mean, it's a higher paid area. There's less poverty in those areas, and so it's what we've kind of come to expect. Here's a kind of layout of all of the sites and the city that they're being built into, but now based off of the education and poverty factors. So also in CalEnviroScreen, you can break down what the education percentile is and what the poverty percentile is. So again, this may be nothing new. The higher the poverty there is in a neighborhood, the higher the education factor is. And again, the education, what that means is if you get a higher score in education, that means there's a larger amount of individuals, adults without a high school degree. And so these areas tend to indicate more poverty. And so as you can see, they're all in the top right quadrant. There's a lot more going in impoverished areas as opposed to the areas at the bottom left, like Chatsworth, Venice, Marina del Rey. Those areas have less poverty and a higher number of educated people with college degrees. So, we can see where these sites are going up. So now we'll be getting into sheltered versus unsheltered homelessness. So just the difference, backing up into what it means. Here I used lacity.org data. And so it's a downloadable data set of the annual homeless count. So LASA does the homeless count every year, every January. And they have their own website where you can track the homeless count based on the map and find out a lot of really interesting information. But the LA City website actually lets you download the data set, so you can control it however you like and layer it on top of other data sets. And so this one is from 2019. It's not the most current one from 2020, but it's still offering a lot of good information. And so here is what it looks like based off of the number of people experiencing homelessness. So this is the total number, sheltered and unsheltered. And so the boundaries you see there are neighborhood council districts. And so again, the darker red means a higher number of homeless. And any neighborhood with 200 or more is marked in red. And that 200 is just sort of an arbitrary number. If you look at the bottom right, you'll see the number is 6,346. That's the area of downtown LA that includes Skid Row. So obviously there's a lot of homeless individuals living there. If I were to kind of map this out in the gradient from pink to red, pretty much most of LA would look pink, and then Skid Row would be pretty much entirely red. So it's not really representative of the home situation. So that's why I made 200 the kind of cutoff point to make red. And this gives you a good understanding of where the highest number of homeless individuals live in Los Angeles. So it's not just in Skid Row. You'll see that it's in pretty much every neighborhood. I don't think there's a single neighborhood that doesn't have homelessness. And so this gives you a good understanding of what the situation is like. This next slide, it looks almost identical, but it's different. This is only unsheltered homelessness. So there are 25,000 total, and unsheltered meaning street homelessness, any kind of street homelessness, meaning they live in a tent, they're living in their car. When you're conducting the homeless count, they have thousands of volunteers go out onto the streets over one night, and they literally count everyone they see block by block. And so these are the numbers that are representative of that. While people are conducting the homeless count, LASA is recording data from the shelters and from permanent supportive housing sites to find out how many people are inside during that time, are staying in shelters. So that's why we call them shelter homeless. Because while you see people on the streets, there are some individuals taking advantage of beds and in-room housing. And so that's what this next slide will show you. And so you'll notice a pretty stark difference. This is, again, the same map, but now showing sheltered homelessness. And you'll see a lot of zeros. There's a lot of pink in this map. So this gives you a better idea of how many shelters we have available, how much housing we're offering. Again, at the bottom right, you'll see Skid Row. They have 2,488 individuals that are housed through shelters or permanent supportive housing. In the Valley, you have North Hollywood and Sun Valley, each with 206. So this gives you a better idea of how we're combating homelessness and what options people have. If you're experiencing homelessness, where can you go? For anyone working in homeless services, you kind of already have an idea of where the shelters are, where the major cities are. But I mean, when you look at this map, you see so many zeros throughout Los Angeles. This really gives you an idea of what we're lacking. So there's a total of 53 out of 95 neighborhood council districts with 0 homeless shelters. And this information, by the way, is again from 2019. So we hope that things have changed since then. I don't have the latest data set for 2020, but I don't imagine it'll be that much different. And so next, just talking about the census. So California is at risk at losing 2 congressional seats and billions of dollars of funding because of individuals not taking the census. As you know, the date already passed, or maybe you didn't hear. There was a lot of back and forth from the government. They tried to move the date up to the end of September, and then it got moved back to the end of October. And finally, they settled on, I think, last week or week before last. So unfortunately, we've missed the deadline to do anything more. But it should be noted that if you're experiencing homelessness, you can take the census. You are a citizen here. Even if you don't have a permanent address, you can use a cross street, you can use an intersection, or a temporary address if you're staying at a shelter. So with the 66,000 people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles, I mean, that's 66,000 people that we could have accounted for and included as part of our census. And as you might imagine, it's very difficult to count the homeless. When LASA does their annual homeless count, they have thousands of volunteers to go out over the streets over one night. With the census, it's not exactly the same. You have to be a census official to conduct that count. I don't believe they had the same numbers as far as volunteers that we had for the homeless count. So it's hard to get a read. It's hard to understand how accurate their numbers were. I highly doubt that they were able to count the 66,000. But if we had our homeless individuals sheltered, it would have been a more accurate count, because what happens is the census was working together with homeless services providers to get a roster of the individuals staying in their beds. Each homeless services agency has a roster, and they account for everyone staying in their beds. So that information would have been more publicly available. We could have accounted for more people. There's 40,000 unsheltered participating in the census, and that could have meant more funding and more representation for that neighborhood. And so next, I'd just like to map the homeless encampments. So this is an app, in case you haven't heard of it, it's called My LA 311. It's available for Los Angeles residents to use in case they need to, it's used for a number of different things, for like trash takeaways, sweeps, things like that. But it's also used to notify the city of a homeless encampment. And it was initially used to provide services. You know, if you think someone needed food or shelter or anything like that, a resident could use this app for someone experiencing homelessness and notify the city. So this data set is also available on lacity.org, and it's all user-generated data. So this is it. This is a look at homeless encampments throughout Los Angeles. Each pinpoint is an instance of an encampment in 2018. It's throughout the entire year, so this isn't over a given night like with the homeless count, but it still gives you a good idea of where people who are experiencing homelessness, where they stay. Unfortunately, some of this information did get used for sweeps, street sweeps. And as you can see, I mean, it didn't exactly work. A lot of times with these sweeps, people are temporarily moved and then they just move right back. So some of these dots you see here could have been just an individual temporarily moving and then just going down the block or returning to their spot. And again, someone marking that. There's 32,793 different user-generated marks. So that's literally how many people, how many different times people in LA use this app to track, to notify the city of someone experiencing homelessness. The city of LA spent 30 million on sweeps in 2019. So again, just to give you an idea that, you know, with all the sweeps that were done, this really didn't do much to fix homelessness. And side note, homelessness, the sweeps are actually beginning again next week. So that's just something to be aware of. And so I'm sorry, actually, I'd like to show you a quick look at this data set, just so you can kind of go in deeper. Again, each individual dot is an instance of an encampment. Here you can see Skid Row. If you've ever visited Skid Row, you know that it's just tent to tent. There's no gaps in between. Because this is per encampment, not per person, you know, this isn't even representative of what Skid Row is like. It's literally lined down the entire block, nothing but tents. But again, it does, when you look at it from the outside perspective, it does give you an idea of what homelessness is like today. This is Koreatown. And again, you see blue dots everywhere. It's important to note, though, that you know you want to keep in mind these are all individuals. These are all people that had nowhere to go. They had no other place to live, and their only option was living on the street. You can look through here and just see thousands and thousands of blue dots, even across the freeways. And I think, you know, living in LA, this is pretty common to us now. There was a time, I think, when it definitely wasn't like this. I think now, like if any of us ever go down to like the grocery store, we go to the bank, we walk anywhere in our neighborhood, we're likely to see at least one person experiencing homelessness. That's how bad the situation has gotten. And, you know, with this data set, it's really helpful because it does share information about where the neighborhood is, what the actual cross street is, who the council district member is. So if you want to do something about this, you can notify your neighborhood council, your city council. You have options, but at least here you have a sort of understanding of, you know, what it looks like and how bad it's gotten. Okay. So I think the most important takeaway is that housing matters. All neighborhoods need to participate. Homeless encampments have spread to every neighborhood council district in the city. And many of the areas, like you saw, that have high street homelessness, they don't offer housing options. Permanent supportive housing funding is underutilized. We have the funding for it, it exists, but resident support is lacking. There's been a lot of protest around it. And so these next few years are critical for approving projects because it takes 2 to 3 years. And so the longer we wait, the longer we protest, that's more time and we're not getting more housing for the homeless. So potential losses in census revenue, lack of affordable housing, and economic uncertainty due to COVID are all factors that could lead to more homelessness over the next year. The good thing though is that you have the tools. Public data is yours to analyze, it's yours to download. Share your thoughts online and with friends, have conversations, get involved locally. I think it's really important to get involved at the local level. Have discussions with your neighbors, attend neighborhood council meetings, attend city council meetings, and volunteer because your efforts do go a long way and you can do a lot. Thank you. You can email me with any questions you have, or if you want to download any public data sets, I can share my Tableau files. I'm happy to help in any way.
Great. Thank you, Andreas. That was very enlightening.
Thank you.
We have one question. Do you see PSH leading to continued success?
I do. So I actually worked at a permanent supportive housing site for 2 years. And I've seen the difference. You don't get the same kind of turnover you might at a shelter. People really do stay housed in those complexes, and they get service. They actually want to participate in the programs. So I think it is the answer. Research shows that it's the answer. LA just hasn't fully embraced it yet. It's still new to us, but I think it is going to be you know, the best solution.
Great. So I have a question. So it looks like there are a lot of studio apartments. Are they big enough for families, or you know, sometimes they're adults and children together?
Right. So most of the ones that have been approved and the way it's designed, it is for individuals, just adults, single adults. But there are now some being approved for families. Typically, if you're a family experiencing homelessness, you won't go with this option. You'll go with a different option, which is just housing in a normal apartment complex with vouchers, and you still might get supportive services. So there's different options, but most of these are for individual adults.
Oh, okay. And I have another question coming in. Looks like a good compilation and show of progress. Is Project Home Key having an impact in these efforts? What are some short-term policy improvements?
That's a great question. So just for background, Project Room Key is what the city is doing right now during COVID to bring in people experiencing homelessness on the street to kind of reduce that contact. We're using motels and hotels that currently aren't being used in the city because, you know, there's been very little tourism. So Project Room Key is housing people in motels and hotels in their private rooms. Now, the success of that has led to now a new project called Project Home Key. And so Project Home Key is going to transition these motels from interim housing to permanent housing. So that is the next step. And yes, that's one of the best things we have coming up. It's going to be, we have one that was just approved in Chatsworth. But yeah, I mean, it's a great solution because currently, I mean, with hotels not being used, we have all this land that's underutilized. It's not used. I mean, it's a great idea.
Great. So another question just came in. With COVID going on, has food insecurity increased and has it impacted homelessness access to food? If you know.
For this one, I know that even before COVID, I think food scarcity has always been, an issue, but thankfully we've had programs like SNAP for food stamps and different options where it hasn't been, in my opinion, from what I've seen, one of the major issues before COVID, and now during COVID, I still don't think that it's one of the major issues in homelessness in Los Angeles. And thankfully, we've seen a lot of community support around COVID with food drives and donating a lot of food. So I know that that's increased as well. So yeah, I think it's always needed, but I don't think it's that urgent.
Okay. What sort of funding amount would be lost if not everyone is counted in the census? You mentioned there was like also maybe potentially 2 congressional seats could be lost.
Correct, and that's for all of California. So it's not just Los Angeles, but pretty much when you participate in a census, you're giving your neighborhood direct funding based off of the more people that are counted for. So in that neighborhood, literally little things like streets getting repaired and minor little things like that, it all goes towards that based off of the neighborhood. In California, I think the 2 congressional seats we were losing was not in Los Angeles. It was south in between San Diego and Orange County. But otherwise, I mean, funding, it's all related to funding. The more people we account for, the more people, the more representation we have and the more funding we get.
And another follow-up question, do you see people leaving the permanent shelter housing to obtain housing outside of PSH? How permanent are these permanent shelter housing options?
They are fully permanent. Now, they do have the option to leave anytime they want. They sign a 1-year lease, but outside of that, they can leave whenever they like. I personally have not seen much of that. I think I've only seen like one situation where that's happened, but it's very rare just because you get to live in a beautiful building. You do pay rent, but I mean, why would you want to leave that? If you leave that, you most likely will have to pay fully subsidized. I mean, full rent. If not, if you qualify for a different program, you can probably get subsidized rent through another program, but you wouldn't get the supportive services. So I mean, it's an option. It's definitely available, but I haven't seen it happen.
Also, what do you think? How has this PSH program improved the lives of the homeless? Like, are they able to find jobs more easily? Have a more stable situation?
Definitely. So in my previous role, I was a program coordinator. So we brought job services. We brought even just wellness programs like yoga classes, art classes, things like that. And yeah, when you have stable living, you're more likely to participate and become a fully member of the community. I mean, a lot of these individuals already were members of the community. A lot of people who experience homelessness go back to the place they grew up in or went to school by or whatever it is. Many of them have lived for many years in that neighborhood. But again, once you're more stable, once you have a place that you can really call your own, it's your own studio apartment, you do want to participate. And I've seen a lot of that.
So I've heard a lot of news with COVID, a lot of people with low income jobs are out of jobs now. So do you foresee there's going to be increase in homelessness in the short term?
I think so. So every year, the homeless number has increased year over year. And that's frustrating because we're housing more people than ever. Every year, we're housing more people year over year. But you're not really seeing those efforts pay off because there's more people entering homelessness. And so this was the case before COVID, as of the last homeless count in January. And so my fear is that with COVID, it's going to be even worse next year. Again, there's more housing happening, so we're housing more people than ever. But I think with COVID, we're going to see, and I think there's been the eviction freeze. I forget when that rolls off, but I fear that when that happens, there's going to be more people entering.
And what motivate you to be in the public sector?
Well, I work for LA Family Housing now, which is a private nonprofit, but I do like just public information. I think it's great that the city has these resources and the county. And I think that's the best thing a city can do is let their citizens get involved, let the residents get involved and be active. And I think it's important to be fully transparent. And so I really like that all this data is available. You know, it's really fun to play with and analyze, and it's important.
And this one's through the chat, more like a comment. Anthony asked, I'm curious about the permanence of the housing due to residents' complaints. I'm up in Sacramento and want to get involved in a similar effort paired with Sacramento self-help's housing. I guess one of the question is, how do you overcome with the resident complaints that they don't want such a development in their neighborhood?
Yeah, you just have to show up. There was a neighborhood council meeting, I think in Sherman Oaks last year, and another in Reseda that we went to. And, you know, we show up we organize and we show up, you know, prepared to speak out on homelessness and why it's important. But during some of these meetings, we're just outnumbered. The residents show up and, you know, a lot of times if you're the loudest person in the room, that's the one person that the city councilman will listen to. And so we've seen success in some cities and, you know, not in others. And so it really just takes putting in the work and showing up in groups and being active, knowing when the meetings are, always speaking out. That's very important.
Well, thank you, Andres. Is there any other questions from the audience attendees? And where can people connect up with you? Are you in Twitter, LinkedIn? How would they want, if they want more, how would they find you?
I don't use Twitter much, but I am on Twitter. You can search for my name. And I am on LinkedIn. Search for my name, Andres Ocon. And otherwise, my email is fine too. It's aocon@gmail.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. That concludes the session, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.